Part A of number 1, write the equation in vertex form. So in vertex form, the first step is to take the constant and move it to the opposite side. To move a negative to the opposite side, you're going to add it. Okay. The next step is going to be to factor out the leading coefficient if it's different than 1. So how do I get what's inside? Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1. Bring down the x squared. Positive 8 divided by negative 2 is negative 4. Bring down the x. All right, now again, at most, we used to, when we're using completing the square to solve, we would divide by negative 2. We don't do that right now. Okay, now take the b. b divided by 2 is, so negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. And it just happens that they're both negative 2, just a coincidence. And now I have to square that. So negative 2 squared is 4. I'm going to put a positive 4 in the back here. I don't write a positive 4 on the left. What I have to remember to do is to multiply this. So negative 2 times positive 4 is negative 8. And y, combine like terms, minus 5. Now move the negative 5 to the opposite side. When it moves over, it becomes positive. This is factored form. Oh, I'm so sorry. This is vertex form. I'm sorry. Vertex form tells us 3 things. It reveals for this particular problem, it tells us you have a vertex of 2, 5. It shows that the parabola, 2 ways of saying it, reflects across the x-axis, or you could say opens downward. So I've taken care of this and the vertex. And the last one, because 2 is greater than 1, we say it vertically stretches by a factor of 2, not negative 2. Remember, the negative sign tells us whether it's going to open up or down. Okay, we're going to go across and do part B. So out of the 3 methods you have to algebraically solve for x, factoring using the quadratic formula and completing the square. Factoring is going to be the easiest for most students. So this says put it into factored, also known as intercept form, if possible. It's not always possible. So here's what we have. Factoring 2 times negative 3 is positive 6. I'm going to try to determine, is it possible to come up with 2 numbers that multiply to give you positive 6 and combine to give you 8? So like 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Do these somehow give you 8? Okay, right, not factorable. When it's not factorable and you're solving algebraically, you have 2 choices. This is where I'm going to ask you to take out a separate piece of paper and practice. First is the quadratic formula. And the second is completing the square. So quadratic formula, I'm going to identify the A, the B, and the C. If you have not memorized the quadratic formula at this point, it's something you should do. So at this point, I'm going to substitute in the values for A, B, C, and then simplify. Okay, so 8 squared is 64. Negative 4 times negative 2 is 8. And 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. Okay, so this answer is 40. And I'm just going to keep breaking it down here. And I know 40 breaks into the square root of 4 and the square root of 10. Okay, now I'm going to separate this. Here we go. And I know this is a negative 1/2. Just recognize a positive times a negative would be a negative, and a negative times a negative would be a positive. So I don't really need to put that into play. I just use the quadratic formula as a way to find the two x-intercepts, the two real solutions, the two zeros, the two roots. Between you and your partner, can I have one of you evaluate this and round to the nearest tenth, and the opposite person will evaluate this one and round to the nearest tenth? You have 20 seconds. Go. Can you please confirm with me, do you guys have an answer of approximately, again rounding to the nearest tenth, 3.6 and 0.4? Hands up high if you have that between you and your partner. Okay, enough of us have that. Is anybody confused how to plug it into the calculator? Okay, do me a favor, come over to this graph. Come over to this graph. We're going to first start by graphing the vertex. So let's go to 2, 5 and graph that point. 2, 5. Then I'm going to make an axis of symmetry with the dotted line. Remember, the axis of symmetry cuts your parabola in half, making it symmetrical. Now I'm going to have to just approximate. So I'm going to go, where's 3.6? Approximate. And where is 0.4? Approximate. And before I go through on the left-hand side, I want to remind you of something you learned freshman year. When it is in standard form, the constant is the y-intercept. So go to -3, and now cut through. To me, now everybody has their own preference. To me, this is a lot of work. Hands up high if you think this is just a lot of kind of tedious work. Okay, so I prefer, when I have to solve and it's not factorable, I prefer to use completing the square. We're going to do that one next. And it's very similar, but not exact, to putting something in vertex form. Here we go. -2x squared plus 8x minus 3 equals 0. So I'm showing you an alternative method to solve for x. Solve for the solution, solve for the roots, the real roots, solve for the zeros. So move the 3 to the opposite side. Now we're going to factor out a -2. So -2 divided by -2, positive 8 divided by -2. Okay, now here's where this is different than putting in vertex form. When you're solving, you now have to get rid of this number out front. So it's being multiplied. Opposite of multiplying is dividing. Now take your b and divide it by 2. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. And then square that value. So negative 2 squared is 4. Whatever you do to the right, you must do to the left. Grab a calculator. We're going to combine those on a calculator to ensure we don't make any simple mistakes. Hit math fraction, enter, enter, and you end up with 5 halves. Okay, now to get rid of the square. So opposite of squaring something is to take the square root. As a reminder, I will have 2 answers. Lastly, let's move the negative 2 to the opposite side. So it becomes a positive 2. One time I'm adding, one time I'm subtracting. Please do me a favor. Between you and your partner, have one person do the adding, get an answer and round it to the nearest tenth. Have one person doing the subtracting. Round again to the nearest tenth. Okay, somebody added. What did you get for an answer when rounding to the nearest tenth? 3.6. Thank you. Somebody else, when you subtract. Okay, are these the exact same answers we had when we do it this way? Exact same. So I'm just curious, for this class, who finds it's just easier to use the quadratic formula? Hands up high? Totally fine. You're welcome to do that. Who says completing the square seems a little easier? Whatever your preference is, you can get it. Okay, let's go back to this part. So it says, what does factoring form reveal? Well, were we able to factor it? Yeah, can't factor, so just put NA. I can't tell you what it reveals when it's not factorable. So I have my equation right now, and I've already graphed it, and I'm looking at the domain. As a reminder, this function is going down, and then on the left it's moving to the left, and as it's going down it's also moving to the right. That's why it's going down in a diagonal position. It's being pulled in 2 directions. Down left, down right. So the domain, there's no restriction how far it's going to go to the left or to the right. The range, always start with the lowest one first. There's no restriction how low it's going to go. There is a restriction how high it's going to go, and in fact it goes as high as 5. End behavior. End behavior says, as you go to the left, one of 3 things is going to happen. It's going to be going down, it's going to be going up, or it's going to be staying constant at some value. So as you go to the left and you evaluate this, which direction is it going? It's headed down, which is negative infinity. And as you evaluate the function going to the right, it is also going down.